Anybody here have used
Eden, I don't know if this
Blab
helps.
before?
I was able to click recording on my end, and it
Oh,
seems
and
to
it
be
is now. Thank
so. All
you.
right.
Yay. Okay, so we're recording this Blab. I'm going to welcome everybody here once again, but be really brief because I don't want to delay. And welcome Rayanne Langdon from TIFF Canada. Rayanne and I have known each other for several years. She does reside in Toronto. However, this evening she's joining us from St. John's, Newfoundland. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do, a little bit about what you do at Tilt, and then we'll get into the Q&As.
Cool. Yeah, so my name is Rayanne. You guys can see that. I have a ton of weird experience in this weird little industry of ours behind me, but currently I work at a place called Tilt. If I was physically with you, I would maybe you have heard of us and ask you to raise your hands. So if you have, maybe just say yes or post something, because I'm always kind of taking a survey of who's actually heard of the service because it's still relatively new in Canada. But just in case you don't, we say Tilt is the easiest way to collect money from a group of people. It's a platform that allows you to collect if you're all chipping in to buy somebody a gift, or nice Jesse, or if somebody is the person collecting all the money for a trip and everybody needs to chip in one place, and a lot of fundraisers. Actually, one of Eden's classes last year, I believe, set up a Tilt and collected money from everybody in the class and bought her a gift. So it was cool. It was cool to come in and talk about it and see people present it that way. But specifically, my role at the company is something we call Tilter Happiness, which is all about making our users, who we call Tilters, incredibly happy throughout the entire experience. So whether that's when they get started, they might tweet at us or call us or send us an email and they have questions, or they might run into issues that they need help with. So kind of traditional customer service, as well as what you might know as retention. So marketing initiatives that get people to continue to use us. So all about just making sure people are always happy, and when they're not happy, making them happy.
And making them. So we're going to find out more about that this evening. And I'm going to kick things off by just starting with the fact that we're starting our segment about community management and blogger and influencer relations today. So some people in the group may not be as familiar with community management. And Trevor Owens, who I don't believe is able to join us right now, asked, what is community management? I realize it's defined in the lecture deck that you provided, but there's several different definitions. So what's yours, Rayanne?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Ultimately, I think it's about connecting with people that use your service, or it could be a service or a product, like connecting with the people who matter to your company in a very authentic way. So something that I'm going to say probably with every question is yes, the online element is incredibly important. Now that this world exists, we're able to answer questions immediately. Customers don't have to phone anymore. They can, but they don't have to. So connecting with them online, whether it's proactively by creating content that they might think is funny or relevant or useful, or answering questions. We all know that Twitter and Facebook are amazing tools for just answering questions from customers incredibly quickly. But also for me, it's really about the in-person element as well. And finding any possible way to build relationships with people that care about your product. So for me, like I said, there's all these online tools, but there's also hosting events locally, or traveling to go to conferences and connecting and maybe getting dinner, or finding ways where in person you can meet up with people that either use your service or your tool or your product, and just doing great stuff there, or going out to meetups or events where people in your industry for the product you're trying to sell are, so that you can not be that robotic person or robotic brand that people don't know anything about, and people want to connect with you as individuals and know that, there's more than just a faceless brand behind this thing that they may or may not want or love to use.
So I'm sorry, I'm getting some text here from somebody in the class. Uh, Specifically, what are some of the day-to-day responsibilities that you have?
For me, I think it is a lot of answering questions, however they come in. So I'd spend, half of my time responding to emails or tweets or however the questions are coming about people using our product. And the other half of it is finding out opportunities to create content or kind of go out into the world and meet some people that are interested in what we're doing. So that could even be, it doesn't sound very social media, but it can be looking at all of our different types of users and sending out a mass email to different groups of people tailored to who that demographic is. Or like I said, a lot of the times, because to such a kind of like network and a lot of our users are young and, university students, we might physically go to the schools and set up a booth or find out where they're having their next kegger and actually going. It sounds like a lot of partying, and sometimes it is.
In fact, I was reading an article yesterday about how Tilt's really taking off on university campuses in the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we launched there in May or something, June, maybe, I don't know. We launched a little while ago. It was our third country after Canada. And that's what it is, like, to be honest. And I know that one of the things we might talk about is ambassadors and what that means. And we actually target university students in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and a couple other countries, because these are the people that, one, they tend to be the early adopters when it comes to apps, and they do everything on their phone. But it's also, these are the people that are collecting money for the things that they'd use our service for: rent for their house, utilities for their house, parties, swag, things like that.
Sounds like fun. I wish we had it when I was in university.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are several people here, and I'm deviating a bit from the pre-planned questions, who are curious about what kind of background somebody has to have in order to become a community manager.
Yeah, that one, every time I meet with a new student or something, I'm like, oh man, I don't even know if I could be where I am or doing what I am if I was starting now. Because a lot of it, quite honestly, is hustle and personality and communicating and just kind of like making a name for yourself, as weird as that sounds. Because it truly is, this is the kind of thing where you need to be somebody that is going to kind of like bleed the company. I always say I bleed Tilts because I talk about it all the time, and it's something that I would use all the time, which is the second part of what I think this person needs. I don't think it's as much about qualifications as it is about really, really believing in what you're doing. Anybody can go work for Pepsi, but if you actually like despise Pepsi and don't align with any of those values, then as somebody who is going out into the community and talking about what a great product you have, that's very difficult. I do think it's possible, especially agencies. I've worked at communications agencies and worked for brands that I don't necessarily use all the time, but you need to figure out how to. You need to connect with the people that do care about it and find out why they care about it, and learn why it matters, because you're talking to people that are buying what you're selling, and you need to be able to be a consumer of your product as well.
Great points. So just in case inquiring, and it's so true that you really have to be passionate about what it is that you're representing. You are the chief ambassador besides the CEO of the brand.
Yeah.
So people are still probably going to be curious, and I know what kind of educational background you have, but why don't you just tell our audience here?
Yeah, for sure. So I went to Carleton University in Ottawa, and I took communication, which is ridiculously broad, and I didn't know what to do from there. So I took a postgraduate in kind of a specific area of communication, which is kind of the area that you guys would be in. It's that like specific part of a broader education, or going back to school to learn a new skill. So it was getting some hands-on experience, and it was with public relations and corporate communications. It was really fortunate because I was there in 2007, which was kind of the beginning of Twitter, and when brands all of a sudden were like, hey, now here's another thing where people are talking about us and we can actually do something here. So that class was not just, writing press releases and calling up journalists and that kind of traditional PR stuff. It was how to start a blog and how to, or what microblogging is. They actually use that term. So Twitter, it was this online PR course. So I was really fortunate at that time, as everybody is now, because then there's stuff like this class. Essentially, that class I took was what you guys are all doing now. So that is my background. And then, of course, the School of Hard Knocks, just life and just working in various roles where you're getting to test different things. You're getting to test every new social tool and just be thrown into the deep end to go to a conference or pick up the phone or all these other things that are about talking to your customers directly, not just sitting behind a screen, but having to get to know the people who matter to your company.
So I know you as somebody who's very outgoing.
Yeah.
Is that a part of your personality that's always been there, or something that you've helped to work hard to cultivate over the years?
No, it's funny. I was an incredibly shy person when I was younger, especially when it came to school. I would to be very proper, and even when I did this post grad. So it truly was something that I did care about social media. Even when I first moved when I was a teenager out of where I think is where I am now, I immediately loved tools like the precursors to LiveJournal. And then when MySpace came around in my early university days, and that kind of thing helped me communicate with people in a way I wasn't doing before. So from there, I, had these skills and I knew how to use the social tools, but I went to work for this company, and this is how Eden and I know each other, called FreshBooks, which is an online accounting software. Sounds incredibly dull, but very cool brand. Haven't heard of it. They do amazing marketing and events, and the product is incredible. So I had to travel and go into conference rooms, and they told me, okay, you have to make 200 people in here know who you are and know who FreshBooks is. And I was terrified. That's so scary to someone who doesn't talk a lot. And eventually I just learned how to do it. And honestly, it's really about complimenting people. I'm not going to lie. You make people feel good and make it seem genuine, even if it's not. I mean, obviously it should be, but when you're listening to people rather than talking, like I feel like I'm talking. But yeah, if you actually ask people questions and learn about them, then they remember that experience, especially if you can remember those things that you said about them.
And I think you do an amazing job of that. You've really built a reputation for being an empathetic, passionate, super friendly community manager.
Thank you. I think that's what it is. Honestly, everybody can take a course now about what community management is. And to be honest, if you were to look up that term on Kijiji or Craigslist or whatever website, then it's going to be social media. It's going to be, we need you to create a content calendar and schedule the tweets. You need to know how to use Hootsuite. And I think that's all very important. But I think what sets some of us apart is being able to take that into other areas. It's not tool specific. It's, being personable, representing the brand, knowing what the tone is, whether that's in your writing or in the way you speak. And obviously if you call Rogers and you're having an issue, if you have somebody who is empathetic and is listening to you, then you're going to be less angry.
It's true. So true. I couldn't see anybody being angry with you.
It happens. It does.
So tell us about a situation where it happened and how you handle that.
Yeah, I think one example that's a good one because it is all of the channels would be there was an issue with our tool with Tilt where a couple where one Tilt in specific that had raised a ton of money from a ton of contributors double charged a lot of people. So there's a bug with a processor, but of course they don't care about that. We're the one that looks like it did. And of course it is. We're the front facing tool there. So there were a few angry tweets, but mostly a lot of calls and a lot of emails about, obviously people are double charged. It was like $190 or something. So it was terrible. And there's not a lot you can do other than work as quickly as you can to make it right. I think a lot of companies where there's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy and hurdles you have to go through, it's difficult to make that happen. But luckily I could immediately connect with some of our engineers, figure out what to do. I went to Second Cup and I just hid for 3 days and I fixed it because it was awful. I just made it know it was a priority. I gave them updates, even if it wasn't fixed. I said I'd let them know tomorrow what the status was. And I'm proud of how it was handled. And in the end, people weren't happy that it happened, but they got their money back. And then it was transparency. Everyone kept saying, they weren't ever left wondering what was going on. So we could just constantly communicate with them that we promise we're making it right.
Yeah. So how much leeway do you have in your role, and how much do you have to go through layers of approval to get things done?
Very little. I have worked jobs where I have needed that, like in the more traditional community management role, which it's funny because traditional really means online, but traditionally community management now is seen as that online role. I've worked with Sobeys where they trusted me and they were happy to have me writing that content and answering questions, but ultimately I don't work at Sobeys. I don't know the answers to all of those questions. So you have at that other company or somebody internally, whether it's legal or someone more senior that can answer those questions for you. And you may have guidelines set out in the beginning. Or even with us, we did this report every day where we'd send it to Sobeys and say, here are the tweets that happened in the last 12 hours. Here are our responses. Are these approved? Yes or no? And eventually they'd trust us to answer any questions that were about bad product or poor customer experience, different things like that. So it really is building trust, which is why I think I don't have a lot of that where I am. I've got enough experience in that kind of role behind me, but also our company takes an incredible amount of pride in hiring that we make sure we hire anybody who wouldn't make a bad decision, or at least a really detrimental one, because everybody makes the bad ones. It's okay to fail. But yeah, I am a one-person department at my company, in Canada. We've got 5 of equivalents to me in our help me, but ultimately I understand how Canadians are using our products, and I have the power to stand up and say, okay, this is an issue. This is how important it is. Stop that. Like if it's an engineer, I can tell them what kind of priority we need to make a bug fix, for example.
And is there a lot of difference between how you handle things in Canada versus the other countries?
I think so. Definitely not with, if something is really urgent. And ultimately the product is the same internationally, but there will be differences, whether it's, the way that Canadians and people in the UK spell, our fancy U's. That's really important to us. And Americans kind of laugh and they think it's silly, but it's important to us. So it is up to my role and equivalents to me in other offices. Our job is to let them know what is important and what might not be. And sometimes it is verbiage. We have different currencies and things like that. So the product differs in some ways, but if there's a big issue, usually it affects everyone. So I think ultimately the big differences there are, one, it's just me in Canada. So I wear a lot more hats, which is more like the traditional community manager role. There's so many things you're doing at once. And I think I do a lot more of that. And honestly, I think I have to act a little bit more quickly because I have more responsibilities that I can't maybe sit and work on something. I have to kind of also have our email system open, and I've got the phone by me and the phone takes priorities. So there's some differences there with just team structure, I think.
Okay. Good answer. It's great that we're getting more insight to how things work day to day for you at Tilt.
Yeah.
And Sarah has a question. She wants to know how you deal with a company that won't give up that control and insist on micromanaging social media or community management. And is it just a matter of building trust? Thanks,
Yeah,
Sarah.
I think it is like there's a lot of stuff. I think ultimately patient, and you have to be ultimately like a community manager is that like liaison and that fighter between your users and your community and the internal team. So, your clients aren't just the users. It's easy to empathize with them, and I think every good community manager does. But ultimately, it's also your bosses internally. So there's always a way to figure out how to make it work, and it might be micromanaging for a while. And I think you just have to make it work the way they want it to work, and you can kind of chip away at it from there. Like, again, I worked at a PR agency where I worked for clients that didn't trust me at all because who am I? And they work for that company. They can't just give up that kind of control. So create a structure, agree on the structure so that if they kind of veer off, which is very likely to happen, somebody ultimately just doesn't value what you're doing as much as you do. So create a structure, stick to it. When they veer off of it, point back to the structure you set and just make changes along the way that help make your job easier. Because ultimately you're doing it for the right reason. You're doing it for the users, and the company would be nowhere without your customers. So you just have to chip away at that.
So you alluded to at least one of the differences between managing community through a PR agency. Actually, you mentioned it a couple times tonight, and being on the client side, being part of that brand. What are some of the other differences between community management when you're client side versus agency side?
Yeah, a huge one there is just, not as much control. Another one, which I think I mentioned a little, is it is harder to have as much passion about it. You're doing so many of them, and especially at an agency that might not be yours, you're not choosing your clients. So it's like, hey, we now have this company that sells things that help you clean your car. This is a real life example. And I'm like, what? So yeah, you kind of, that's not as easy, but it's challenging, which is the fun part of it. So that's a big difference. And you're juggling a lot. So your job actually might be more focused and might be more like create content calendar, schedule, have time blocking, doing your reporting and seeing what people are saying. Whereas in-house, it definitely is like you're looking at that stuff a lot more and things seem a little bit crazier in your head. But if you're agency, you're doing it usually for many clients. So in both cases, there's just a million things that you're doing at the same time. But yeah, I'd say those are the three biggest things.
So thank you. How much do you find yourself representing the interests and needs of the community members versus the internal organization? And how do you balance those interests?
Ooh, that's the toughest one you've asked so far.
Sorry, and I know we have a list of potential questions, and most of these aren't even on there.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's the way it should go.
See, I'm listening.
Yeah, totally. I think it's honestly just about organization. So a good example is like when I was working at FreshBooks, we had this internal, which I'm trying to do even more of this at Tilt, where every time anybody wanted something, we would track it. We would track who said it and when they said it and all of that stuff. And even though it wasn't a priority at the time internally, we could just see how much of a priority it was in the community. And then eventually we might build that feature. And when we launch it, we can go back out and communicate it to all the users. And I don't think a lot of web apps like Facebook would never do something like this. So it was fun to just be able to be that kind of honest and let them know, you were one of the first 20 people who asked us to build this. And now we built it. Thank you. Here you go, which means so much to somebody who's a user of your service, like in our example. But yeah, because it was incredibly organized and we could track it, you need data. If you're going to make a case for something, and I ask person to talk about data, and I hate it. I don't like dealing with numbers and spreadsheets, but sometimes you have to, and you need to learn how to know what matters and how much it matters. So is this a 10 on the priority list or is it not? And then have regular communication with your internal team to fight the good fight.
And I bet you do a lot of fighting the good fight on behalf of those community members.
Yeah.
So I just had what do you find most rewarding in your role and why?
That one's easy. It's 100%. Well, I mean, selfishly, it's immediate gratification. Not all community management is, but if I'm answering somebody and giving them help immediately, of course they're happy. If you call up a company, you have an issue and it's solved, you're like, oh man, I didn't have to be on hold. I didn't have to get transferred around or wait for a response. So the fact that I actually get to do that for people and make them happy immediately makes me happy because they're happy, but also because I feel like I did a good job. And also Tilt we see a lot of fundraisers. People raise money for incredible causes going on in their communities or the world. So the fact that people can raise thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars for causes that mean something to them. I mean, that's cheesy, but it's the truth. It's amazing to just go out. And there was somebody in the last class I spoke at who raised, how much did she raise? Like $60,000 for her godson. Wow. Who's in a wheelchair and he can't see or talk, and he's a ton of diseases, and his family need to do a bunch of renovations to their house so that they can have a house that supports a child living in this kind of world. And we got to go out. She did a fundraising event. Media came out to it, and it was just at a bar, but it's intimate, but really cool. And just to meet the little boy that she was doing this fundraiser for and get to talk to him and see, he doesn't understand too much, but you can see that there's a lot of love there. So that's really, really gratifying.
It's stories like that really bring meaning to your work, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So we're getting to the end of our community management half hour, and I just wanted to ask you, where can people find you online?
Ooh, I am at a bunch of places. I think I'm way less active on Twitter than I was when Eden and I met many years ago, but R. Langdon, so you can see it's kind of connected in this tool here. That's my Twitter name. Facebook, I'm Ran Langdon. That's where I'm the most active. I think I'm pretty funny, so check me out. That would be the majority of time. I guess Ran Langdon on Instagram too. I just got a puppy a couple months ago, so lots of really cute photos if you're interested. Obviously.
Absolutely. We're interested. We all have cute new puppies.
Exactly.
I might be talking a bit about that with you when she gets in a few minutes. And where can we find you with Tilt?
It's just at Tilt. We have an at Tilt Canada as well, but we're currently talking to both Twitter and Facebook about internationalizing in other ways. So everything is just like look up Tilt on Facebook, at Tilt on Twitter, keeping it really easy and streamlined. It's a lot of college material, so I don't know how into it other people will be, but the college students sure are.
I'm sure. And anything else you want to add? We're just waiting for Jamie and Zane. So anything else you want to add in the next?
No, I don't think so. I just, I know I get very distracted. So I was purposely not looking at some questions, but I noticed somebody I think did have questions about the actual tool and technical issues. So I'm going to just look at all this afterwards and reach out. So please, anybody tweet at me or ran@tilt.com and I will help you.
Great, because I may have missed that too, so sorry about that, because I was trying to catch all the questions and relay them as best possible.
It's a good problem to have.
It is a good problem to have. So we're switching gears here, and we're going to talk more about blogging and building online relationships, which ties into community management. And our next guest, Jamie Lee Cuthbertson, is joining us. I'm not sure if Zane will be or not. The three of us can keep everybody entertained. And if we have anybody in the class who wants to join us, by all means, you can take turns on the fourth seat. Let's start by introducing Jamie. Jamie Lee. She is at Zulu Alpha Kilo. And I had such a hard time. I constantly mix up the K and the Zs, but now that I know where it comes from, I will always get it right. Jamie is also, pardon?
You're not the only person that gets it confused, so don't worry about it.
Because I want to go alphabetically as opposed to mixed up. So now that I know the CEO's name is Zach, it makes it much easier. Jamie also is somebody who I met when she started taking the very first foundations course in early 2013. Is that right? Was it 2013 or 2012? I think it was January 2013.
Yeah, 2013 was the first cohort.
And that's where we met. And Jamie, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and let them know what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a social strategist right now at an advertising agency in Toronto. So most of my day-to-day is a mix of community management as well as developing social strategies for some of the brands that my agency works on. And on the side, I do a bit of blogging as a hobby. So I blog about Toronto in general and a Toronto spin on things. So anything to do with like events or cool Toronto companies or products that are launching in Toronto, I will blog about it.
And what's the name of your blog?
So it's just Jamie Lee TO right now, which is the same as all of my social handles. I'm actually about to dive into a rebranding, so we'll see after the holidays what comes out of it. But so far, just my name.
Okay, and why are you thinking of a rebrand?
Because I really hate the name of my blog. I hate that it's just my name, and I think that like my readership is probably big enough now that I can justify hiding behind a bigger blog name than just my name. And I'd love to bring in contributors as well, and it's a bit difficult to do when it's just your name on something.
Oh, I think we have a. Okay, so Alex Daily TV is asking you to do a review of Frank's Pizza House in Toronto.
I love it.
So why don't we get right into it since somebody's pitching you right on Blab. Rayanne, I just ask real quick, are you currently blogging?
No.
Okay, but all of us have experience with influencer relations. And do all of us have experience on both sides? I think we do. We've been pitched and we've done pitching, all of us? Okay, great. So, Jamie, why don't you tell us a little bit about you being pitched by an agency or a brand on behalf of a brand and how that all works?
Yeah, so every once in a while, it's mostly through PR companies, I find, but I'll get an email. I get a few phone calls every year, and I always think I hate phone calls. I hate getting pitched by phone.
Yeah, it's weird.
But I'll get an email, and it's a company or a brand has a product or an event that they think might be of interest to me or my readers. Most of them are not, but I guess everyone's gotta spin a story the right way. And what they want is basically you to cover their event or their product, basically the brand that they're repping. And they'll send you info and a press release if they're good. And if they're good, they'll try and find an angle that will work for you. But a lot of times I find, at least lately, it's a lot of brands looking for free coverage. Just like, if you were launching a new store, you would want coverage in the Toronto Star. But there's now this second tier of media, which is personal blogs.
And you're finding people are asking you to do things for free?
A lot of the time.
A lot. And do you do things for free?
I do. I do a lot of I'd say like percent of the content on my blog is just curated by me, and I'm not getting paid for it. There are a few things I will actually do for pay, and it's usually companies that I would have blogged about for free anyway. But usually if I approach a brand or a PR company to work with them and I kind of pitch them, then that's where I'll charge, just because it takes a lot of my time to develop that idea and then execute it. But yeah, a lot of it's just my reviews of events or products or things that I like.
So you'll actually pitch a brand and say, I have this idea and it's going to cost you X amount of dollars or product?
Yeah, I'll pitch them on my idea, and I don't like to go into too much depth in the initial email unless I have a great relationship with the PR company. Because I don't want my ideas stolen and used with other bloggers that might do it for free. And then, yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of, I'd love to review your service. I think it would be a great fit for my readers. Sometimes the cost is just what it would cost for me to review the service. Other times I'll charge for the blog post just because it takes me more than 10 minutes of my time to put it together, and I should get paid for my time. And other times, yeah, it's product that they can pay in if it's good product.
That's a bit of an it's an interesting twist. I've been pitched from bloggers, but for the most part, I've been pitched by brands wanting me to write about something, and or by, when I'm wearing the brand hat, by blogger. Mostly we do the pitching as opposed to being pitched to. Sometimes I've been pitched to. What about you, Rayanne?
I don't get pitched a lot just because I'm just not doing that as much as I used to, or even the little I did then. But I think a good example I actually put in the deck that I think you shared was from somebody who works at McDonald's, because I had actually posted. I don't blog, but I've been around, and sometimes brands are like, oh, there's she has enough followers, or however they determine. So they pitched me just to write a tweet about their Monopoly promotion. And it's a brand that I love. I worked there when I was a kid. I think it was an awesome place to work. So I did it. And then they sent me a $50 gift card, which I would have done for free. So it was a pleasant surprise.
Well, that's awesome. We have Zane Kaplansky joining us. Hi, Zane. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Great, thanks, from Kaplansky. So we've got a bunch of questions also coming in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and how that translates online as well, and then we'll go through some of the questions in the sidebars.
Sure. So I own a restaurant on College Street called Kaplansky's Deli, and we have a food truck, a catering business. I have 2 franchises at the airport. We're building our first franchise in the city to be opened early next year. And I also host a weekly radio show and do some work on the Food Network as well.
You're not too busy, are you?
No. It's just with all my extra spare time, I use social media heavily. So to get back to the point of your question, I do use Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram significantly to help me connect. And in the restaurant business, it's very, very competitive. So there's 8,000 or 9,000 restaurants in the city of Toronto. And how do you set yourself apart? A lot of it has to do, I think, with relationships. And I'm I think, successful at building relationships with people in large part because I do all of my own Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And I respond to people and interact with people. And in addition, I have a blog that I haven't maintained all that well recently, but an AskZaneAnything.com website as well that I also use to connect with people.
Well, we're going to be asking more and more about that in a sec. And we have a whole bunch of questions that will appeal to you and apply to you as well. But I'm going to ask a question that's probably more suited to Jamie and Rayanne because you've both been doing influencer pitching. Rema Pleer, I think that's how you pronounce her name, who's also, I think, Mimi, says, how does one find the right blogger to pitch to? Which was also, I believe, the question that you had given, one of the questions that you had given me in advance. Who would like to take that one on?
I can do it. I've worked, I used to run my own business doing social media consulting and management. And part of that was throwing events for my clients. And this is when, influencer events was the hottest thing to do. So I would have to develop influencer lists to invite to the events. So it's the same as pitching a blogger to write a story. What I was doing was inviting influencers to an event in the hopes that they would talk about, the brand or my client afterwards. And then on the other side of it, I've been the blogger who people have invited to events or to talk about their products. So I think in terms of finding the right blogger, what I do is I I'll come up with a list of bloggers that I follow that I think would be a great fit for the brand. Depending on what the brand is, a lot of them are sensitive to having competitors. So doing a search through their blog for articles about your competitors to see if, if you're working on McDonald's, maybe you should check to make sure that they don't talk about Harvey's all the time on their blog, because then it's probably not a good brand fit for them. So it's a lot of research on what they write, what kind of subjects they talk about, and a great way to discover new blogs outside of using your Google fingers and your search engine skills. I like to use social listening, so just using keywords and if you don't have access to social media tools, just even going to twitter.com/search and use keywords to find people that tweet about the industry or the type of client that you're representing.
Yeah, I agree with Jamie. The time is, you need to invest it, because you can work at a firm that has lists available, and your brand you're working with probably wants you to just like look at a list and get the top 10 people in Toronto that are blogging, and those ones are obvious. They want Blogteo and Torontoist and whoever else. But if you're actually just Googling and people that are about the specific, like I worked with Nutella for a bit, and the brand wanted certain lifestyle bloggers, but there's so many people blogging about Nutella all the time. So you can find very specific people that are going to love and talk about your brand. So it's a lot of Googling. Look at if people are commenting on the blogs. And my newest favorite way is, it takes a lot of time, but find them on Instagram and look and see who people are tagging or commenting. I think I just went to audio only, but
I think you did. I'm trying to bring you back. Real Estate Jackie has a question for Jamie Lee. She wants to know how many followers you have.
On my social accounts, I don't have a huge following, especially on Facebook. I try and cull down that list. So on Twitter, I think I have like 3,000 followers, and on Instagram, I'm just under 1,000. So not a huge audience as Toronto bloggers go.
Do you think you need a huge audience to be influential?
I don't, and that's actually kind of the way that I pitch myself, is that I think I have a very engaged audience, and I think that a lot of people can buy followers, or you can get people to follow you that have no interest in what you're talking about. But I started my blog as a resource for my friends and family, and I think that I've grown that friend group through my blog and expanded that audience. But at the end of the day, people are coming to me for advice or me to talk about what they want.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just reading through here because we're hearing that for some people we're frozen, but I think maybe we're frozen on her end as opposed to the whole blab. I know Rayanne was booted off and is trying to get back on, but I think if you're having trouble with freezing, you may want to log off and try logging back on again. So Mimi is also asking, for those of you, I guess this just applies to Jamie, and we'll have a big question for you in a second, Zane. Do your readers have to know that you're being paid for your coverage?
Good question. I think the ethical thing to do is to disclose when you're being paid. So I am not perfect with this. I have definitely forgotten that little sponsored post disclaimer at the bottom of some of my recent posts. But I think this is something that the Canadian industry hasn't quite addressed yet. And I know Americans are ruled by is it the FCA or
the FTC? The
there
FTC.
But for Canada, there isn't really anything regulating this. So for now, you legally don't have to disclose that you're being paid, as far as I know. But the right thing to do is to tell people that you are. And a lot of times I think, some bloggers think that this makes them less credible, but I think it actually adds a bit of credibility to your posts. If people know that you'll disclose when you're being paid, I think that makes you a bit more trustworthy than someone who's kind of a secret shill.
Well, and in fact, there are several brands and agencies who won't work with influencers unless they are disclosing their relationships.
Yeah. Those are good brands.
Especially if they're from the States. Well, exactly, working with Canadians because they are covered by the FTC. And I think there's issues here where there can be legal recourse in certain situations. We address it in this week's deck as well. So you can follow through. If you're in my class, you can follow more details, and there's lots of links to that also. Jesse has a question for Zane. Really interesting here. How do you mash together the diner delicatessen feel with a social media presence? Are your customers primarily social media users?
So I wouldn't say that my customers are primarily social media users, although as we grow our business as franchises, we're really focusing on millennials, and millennials are social media users. So I think we're well positioned there in our growth plans. But to answer the first part of the question, I was featured in a recent documentary called Deli Man, and part of what the unspoken truth of that movie is that the deli business is really personal, and the people in the movie are, for the most part, real characters. And I was very flattered and very honored to be included in it, because there are hundreds and hundreds of delis across North America, and they weren't all included. But what I'm trying to say is that because I've built the brand around myself, because it's Kaplansky's Delicatessen and I'm Kaplansky, that the fact that my social media is authentic, meaning I write it, and sometimes I get in trouble for it, sometimes you win, you lose, whatever, it's real. And I think that the real experience that I give on social media does bring the deli into everybody else's world, and they get to know really who I am besides just the guy who makes their sandwiches.
True. And it's nice to write to you and hear right back from you, especially, or if we're sharing pictures about our smoked meat sandwiches from Kaplansky's.
Yeah, I love the interaction. I really do. And people always say to me, what's your favorite part of what you do? And frankly, I love watching people eat my food. And an extension of that on social media is when people take pictures of it, and people let me know, for better or for worse. Because one of the nice things about, I put my email address on everything that we print, and now all of our social media is going to be on our new menu as well. But because of my personal connection to my guests, I'm able to respond when something unfortunate happens, because something unfortunate will always happen. It's just the nature of humanity, and it's how you respond to it that matters. And so social media gives me the opportunity. Now, it can be tricky too, because somebody can post something very negative on social media, and if they have 50 or 60 followers and I respond to it and I've got 14,000 followers, I'm now publicizing their criticism on social media. So you have to play a bit of a tricky game, and sometimes what I do is try to find an email address or find a website so I can contact that person offline. I would rather not, air my problems in public, but then try to resolve them as quickly as possible as well. Because I always look at it that I don't care how you let me know, just the fact that you let me know you had a negative experience gives me the opportunity to fix it.
Do you find that you'll sometimes respond to them at least with an acknowledgement, let's say in a tweet, even if you decide to take it offline, so that if people are searching to see if you are acknowledging and helping that customer the problem, that they'll see that, and then those 14,000 people will know that you are invested in helping your customers?
I think, you know what, I truly tend not to do that. I truly tend to try and keep that stuff offline. Unless, as far as I'm concerned, it's between me and that customer, and that I think I run a higher risk of, I had something happen last week where somebody ordered a sandwich on Uber Eats, and they posted on social media that how disappointing it was. And when I was able to contact him through back and forth, we were able to eventually resolve what had happened. But I don't think that the problem with Twitter or Facebook is that you see what's in the news feed and you may not see the full story or the full resolution. So I don't know if I can really trust people to see. It's like, oh my God, Kaplansky sucks. Well, what happened? So they'll know that I responded, but how it got resolved and what happened, they may not be available to take that be part of that full story. And so I would rather, this person and their 40 followers knows that I messed up versus their 40 followers and my 14,000 followers. I like to put it out there. I don't need to put it all out there.
True. So Austin wants to know if you guys use Pinterest to drive traffic. Perhaps if those of you who do can say that you do and how or why. Anybody here on Pinterest?
I don't use Pinterest myself. I'm actually registered, but I've never pinned anything. And I came to realize early on that every social media that you get involved with takes up a certain amount of real estate of your life, meaning time. Mm-hmm. And that I've had people ask me to, get on their new whatever. And I realized that the time that I spend on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, people say to me, "Oh, you're always online." And I tend to be, but I choose not to go on Pinterest that much, and it just hasn't really ever worked for me.
I think excuse me. You need to pick the platforms that make sense for what it is your business does. Like if you're selling clothes, then I fully recommend it. And Pinterest, actually, there's proof that you can buy directly from Pinterest now. It's amazing, but I mean, you're not going to buy a sandwich on Pinterest. So I think you're making the right decision there. So if you do have the time, there are ways I think any brand can use any platform, but it's probably not a wise investment of your time. So clothes and crafts and stuff like that. And I'm belittling the platform there, but I think it's an amazing sales tool if you're merchandise online.
Mimi asks, of all of you, how many hours a day or week do you use on social media? And I apologize, I'm kind of choking here. So
it's okay, drink some water. Personally or professionally? I think those would be.
Why don't you answer both?
Oh gosh. Personally, too much. Because I'm telling my family down here, because I'm visiting my family in St. John's, and a lot of them don't go online very often. But I don't watch the news. I check Facebook. Facebook's my favorite. I'm not kidding. I think I spend 5 hours a day. And I love it. It's my everything. It's how I learn everything. I have so many things saved and I'm just addicted. Professionally, it's funny because it's community management, but as I talked about, it's a mix of the phone and emails and social media and going out to events. So maybe a couple, because we're lucky too. We use integrations for answering. So we use Zendesk as a customer service tool, and Zendesk will automatically pick up questions on social media. So I don't have to actually spend a ton of time going, "Oh my God, am I missing questions?" But way more personally.
When I was a kid, I had an assignment once where you had to log the number of hours you watched on television. And I remember I was so embarrassed by the number of hours that I was actually watching TV that when it came time to reporting to the class, I cut the number in half and I reported that. I think it's probably the same with social media. I don't think I'm on it all that often, but I know that I'm always looking at my phone. And I think I'd be quite shocked by the number of hours that I spend per day, per week, keeping in touch with people.
What about you, Jamie?
I would say the only hours that I'm for sure not online are about midnight to 6 a.m.
Yeah.
But I'm really guilty. Like I work with some people that are really good at turning off all of their notifications while they're at work, and they don't have Facebook open because they don't want to see notifications or chat messages come up. But I am online all the time, and during the workday, it's mostly for work, and then when I leave work, it's a mixture of professional and personal. I love social, and I'm like Rayanne. I'm a lot less active on Twitter now, but I'm still on Facebook all the time, and I'm still scrolling through my timeline and seeing what people are talking about. And I'm a huge fan of Instagram, so I'm one of those people that I have to scroll to the bottom of my Instagram feed to the last photo I saw, and then like until then, you can't bother me. I have to see every post from people I follow on Instagram, which is really sad. But I'm online way too much.
I think we're all online a lot. That's why we're all here.
Yeah.
Real Estate Jackie asks, and this is a nice build to the last question, do you dedicate a specific time period, i.e. an hour in the evening, or just ad hoc throughout the day as you get time? Like basically, where do you put the time for your social media now? I hear some of us are doing it throughout the day, but do you have scheduled time periods that you dedicate to that?
I fully believe that that's a good practice. Like even as Jamie was just saying, like it's easy to get really distracted. Jamie and I work in these like very social fields, and it's a huge interest. I'm using Jamie instead of using because I know her personally. But like even for my job, my boss once sat me down and he's like, when you get distracted all the time, you might lose an hour a day not being focused on something. This is a thing for computer web developers where you lose time because you get sidetracked and to get refocused. So I do try to find like 2-hour chunks where I can get off of the reactive type of platforms and just like focus on something. But on the other hand, I found people have difficulty making time for social when they're working with certain brands. So I would just, as soon as you get at your desk, like whether it's you have Twitter lists created or you do have some sort of certain blogs you're following, it works differently for every person. But if you have to be regimented, then be regimented.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I wish I lived the kind of structured life where I could say, this is my hour for social media, but I'm literally, as Jamie Lee said, when except when I'm sleeping, I'm connected and I try to respond quickly. Part of, I just wrote a feature article for the Globe and Mail about how small businesses get media, and social media is a big part of it. And one of the biggest parts also is being able to respond quickly to reporters. So what I find is that if you don't respond quickly, they'll find another source or somebody else to talk to. And if you can be top of mind with a media source, that just responding quickly matters. So, I mean, that's how I justify. It's also probably slightly obsessive compulsive disorder, borderline, maybe should even be medicated. But no, I'm always on the phone.
Jamie, did you want to tackle that?
I am not going to set a schedule like that. I do have certain times and certain situations that I will not pull out my phone. But one of those rules is like dinner with my family, because I don't see them very often, but sometimes things happen where, a client's website gets hacked in the middle of a special dinner with my family, and I've got to pick up the phone and deal with it and miss dinner. So I set more rules around when I won't be online than when I will be online.
So next question. Jesse has a question for Rayanne.
Yeah, I'm answering him directly on here because that's very specific to Tilt.
Okay.
I him and I.
Yes, it is. It's more of a Tilt question.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mimi's back with a question saying, because of the nature of different platforms, do you promote on Facebook versus Twitter versus Instagram, or according to different schedules? I think basically she's asking, which platform do you use most and why might be a different way of phrasing that. But do you have specific platforms you'd like to be on more?
I've started using Instagram because I can use Instagram and then that'll post onto Facebook and Twitter for me. But I also know that people use Facebook and Twitter differently. Twitter is more of a news source, whereas Facebook is more of a social connectedness experience, almost like life as performance art kind of source. But I tend to blur those lines myself, and maybe I'm just not very good at social media that I do that, or maybe I'm lazy. But I find that if I want to share a picture, I can do that on both of those and try and engage people that way.
Anybody else want to take that?
Different schedules. Like if you're thinking about time too, I know there's always lots of articles about like when is the best time to tweet, stuff like that. I mean, there is some data to it, but ultimately this is going to be different for everybody. And the beauty is these tools are quite analytical now, and they will give you that information, like when people are most engaging, and if you're able to make that kind of time to know that your audience is available at this time. So it's very specific to industry. It's specific to your company. So I think you just need to. It just takes time to nurture who actually cares about you and just do what's right by them.
Yeah, and
real estate. I'm sorry, Jamie. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, if you know your audience, you should know when they're going to be active online. So if you're targeting moms, think about when moms are going to have the chance to be online. It's probably early in the morning before kids wake up, maybe at lunch, and then after the kids go to bed. So those are great times to target moms in general.
And you have to think about different time zones as well.
Exactly.
So real estate, Jackie has a question for Ran and Jamie. She's both of you mentioned that you no longer use Twitter as much. Why is that?
I don't know about you, Ran, but I find
knew
that
this question was going to come up.
There just seems to be less engagement on that platform, and sometimes you feel like you're just kind of speaking into a black hole and not getting a lot of responses back.
Yeah. I fully use it as that, Jamie. It's fine. I've never thought of it that way, but I say stupid things just to keep it active. I'm like, I have a weird thought that someone I posted too much on Facebook, so I would one of my tweets that I reference a lot last me is like, White Chicks has been on TV like 4 times this week, and that was all I tweeted because it was a thought I had and I wanted to share it, and that was Twitter, black hole. There's so many articles. If you Google like the death of Twitter, to be honest, I haven't read them because I don't know, I haven't. But personally, I just think it's not as, it's more like news and celebrities, and it's way less about my friends, and I care about my friends.
Which is a great segue to Mimi's question. She asks, does being on social media, does your being on social media to the level that you are affect your personal relationships? So I think everybody could answer that question. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. I think that's why I've had to impose some rules on myself on where I can and can't use social media. Obviously, with the exception of emergencies or emergency work stuff, but I think not even just social media, but I find that having to be connected all the time for work now, because we have smartphones and, most jobs are outside of the typical 9 to 5 time now. I think that it's important to put those restrictions on, or else it can affect personal relationships. And I'm lucky that a lot of my friends are very active on social. So I recently went on a vacation with like 10 of my friends, and there was a vacation hashtag so that we could all see each other's photos on every platform that we posted them. And we had a collaborative Facebook photo album for the trip, but that's definitely not the norm. And I'm sure that's not a norm that my boyfriend would like to see imposed in our house, where everything has a hashtag and I share everything. So
I think there's also generally accepted social norms around real life relationships, where if you're using social media while you're in the presence of other people, whether it's in any context, it's considered rude. And unless there's an emergency or an issue or something going on that needs to be dealt with, if I'm sitting talking to somebody, that person wants to have or should have my full attention. And I think that I don't want to ever confuse Facebook friends with real friends, although they may be the same in many cases, that when you're with somebody, you look them in the eye, you make sure that they know that you have your full attention. You're not scanning around the room to see who else you should be engaging with. And you don't let it dominate your life. It has a time and a place. That being said, for me, it's been a very positive thing. I've met many real life friends for the first time on Twitter and connected with people in a very positive way through social media. But, you know, I don't talk on the phone in a restaurant. I don't. I excuse myself to do those kinds of things, and especially if I need to engage on social media, I'm not going to do it in front of somebody else. That's not polite.
It's funny. I always talk about my like rules to social media, and I think they were in the deck that you might have shared too. I never can remember them either, but one of them is like, sorry, phone might ring. One of them is like be nice and just be a decent human being, like the jerk. Same with in person. You know, you wouldn't just ignore your friends. Like it's exactly what Zane said. Just be reasonable.
Well, actually, I'll tell you, I hadn't even thought of this earlier, Eden. I'm sorry to interrupt you if you're going to say something. I had somebody on Instagram the other night post some really terrible things about me that like claimed to know things that had happened that hadn't happened. And I found it really troubling. I mean, I was able to delete the messages and block the person, but essentially it was really disturbing. And so it's kind of what Ryan was saying about be nice. I mean, there are unfortunately all kinds of people out there who use the anonymity of the internet to say and do terrible things to other people. And when you're on the other side of that, it's really unpleasant. And so it only reinforces the notion of what Ryan just said. You know, just be a mensch, be a good person, and there's no reason to do what that person
don't hide behind
done.
your screen.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. I don't know that Trevor is with us tonight. He has some questions that are pertaining more to blogging. And the first one is, before you started blogging, were you a strong writer?
That's an awesome question. You guys go first because you're the better bloggers than me.
I started out as an English major in university and ended up going down to an English minor, but I thought I was a good writer. I think blogging has actually made me a worse writer, as well as working in social media, which is kind of sad. I've actually looked into more grammar courses to improve, but I think I was a fairly strong writer before, and that's definitely gotten worse over the years.
I've always loved to write. It's something that I really enjoy doing. And I always found blogging to be incredibly cathartic, that it was a way for me to express the way I felt and to share it with other people, because I had a lot of difficulties opening the restaurant. And I felt that by sharing the difficulties, it would humanize me for people, and people would realize that we were trying our best, but we just had difficulties keeping up with demand. The first year in the restaurant business was excruciating. And in fact, just earlier tonight, I was at a hot pot place on Spadina that opened a week ago, and the owner was apologizing. You know, it took 2 hours, and I got a parking ticket. I didn't know that until I got back to the car, by the way. And I said to him, you know, this is what startups are like. And if anybody's going to understand, of course I will. But sometimes people don't. And I've been waiting here for 2 hours, and I couldn't get my bill, and they sent the wrong stuff, and all the other things that happen in restaurants. And that by sharing my feelings about it, I found were helpful. But then I also found that because I revealed as much as I did, that people often would feel connections to me that weren't real, like I didn't really know them. I once had a guy walk into the restaurant, and I received him at the door. You're on your own today? Yep. He said, I am. And he said, you know, I read your blog. And I said, oh, that's interesting. He said, yeah. He said, you know, I know all about you, and you don't know anything about me. And I turned around and I walked away. Like I didn't know how to deal with the person. So I think I slowed down in my blogging, in part because I felt like I was being too revealing.
That's interesting, because I think how I learned about you as a blogger was when you were actually talking about an experience that you had going out for a steak dinner.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. And I actually ran into the guy whose restaurant that was recently. He never responded to me. He never that started out as a letter to him, and then or I guess I sent that to him eventually. I didn't name the restaurant, but I know that he knew it was his restaurant, and I knew people who worked there. And you have to be careful. I mean, I didn't want to publicly shame anybody, but I wanted to let him know that he had a problem, and it never did get resolved, and I've never been back to that restaurant.
Power. Marianne, do you want to talk about whether or not you felt you were a strong writer first? Did writing online make you stronger? Or
Yeah, I'm actually kind of opposite of you, Jamie. I feel social media a little bit better because I can be concise, and I can try to be fun quicker. But I've always liked writing. I always kind of thought I was going to be a journalist one day. So I do think that was something I had with it. And so I missed that about the times where I would sit down and blog. So I'm finding other ways to write right now. I'm actually going to write a children's book. That's what I'm going to do. But I don't think it's necessary. I know lots of bloggers that are real bad writers and are super famous. So not a requirement.
Mimi asks, do you think non-millennials, i.e. older people, are at a disadvantage in this field? Is being young a qualification?
I would say, and I feel like other people will disagree with me, but I feel like the first successful group of bloggers were the mummy bloggers. I know they hate being called that, but let's say the bloggers who blogged about mum stuff first. I think they found that niche quickly, and I think they made a lot of money off of it very early on. And I think now, if you think about it, if you look at a business, the people with disposable income are older people. So if your audience or your customer base is an older crowd, chances are you'll be able to sell more, I think, than if you're marketing to millennials. That's my view of it.
Yeah, I think honestly the hardest disadvantage for non-online community management would just be sometimes the hours are long, or you're going to events later at night and your schedule is weird. I think that's the biggest disadvantage at that age, because you might have a family and other things to come home to. So yeah, that would be the biggest thing for me.
I imagine that younger people are more instinctive with social media because they grew up with it as a fact of life, whereas non-millennials like myself didn't. But I don't find that and maybe I'm not as self-aware, but I don't think there's a particular disadvantage. I think maturity has some advantages, and seeing the perspective that older people have also is important to both online and real life relationships.
I think it's not an age, it's attitude, right? It's willingness to do something different and just to jump into it, because there's people that are 20 that give no craps about any of it. So yeah.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Ryan, and I know it's not really my panel in terms of being a panelist here, but I've always said that it's more of an inclination than an age thing, although it's changed a lot over the past several years because now social media has become mainstream. But in the early days, the people whose blogs I was reading most were generally people who are boomers. And today, because they were some of the earliest thought leaders, and several of them are actually in their late 50s and 60s now. It's true. There are bloggers who are
funny,
who are older.
It's funny.
I was hired once about a year ago to be an influencer on a new social media site called Selfish. And I found it so uncomfortable trying to talk to people in my online world and my real life world to join me on Selfish. I found that the word selfish and the title of the community was so, you can't tell me that you're about sharing stories and collaboration if it's called selfish. I mean, it's just so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And I told them that, I realized that you spent a fortune of money buying the selfish.com URL and building this whole online community around Selfish, but it's as some I don't feel comfortable with this, and they fired me, but they actually ended up changing the name as well to they call it Storia.
Cool.
Now. And they seem to catch on with younger groups of people in Northern European countries, and I guess self-involved deli owners in Toronto just wasn't their target market.
Not. Well, it's like people app that hasn't been released yet, but people are making, where you can add anybody and rate people like you would a restaurant on Yelp. It's insane. It's the same kind of attitude. Like, I'm not a commodity. Get out of here.
Right.
I think Trevor has another question for everybody. We read a lot about beginner mistakes. Sorry for me, I'm going to another screen. I only have 3 here, trying to do this thing. We read a lot about beginner mistakes. What are some that you made early on, and what did those mistakes teach you?
One of the mistakes I made was talking about girls that I was dating, and not cool. Don't do that. Keeping your private life private, and your public life can be shareable, but some things, especially when you're talking about people who haven't given their permission to be talked about, was a big mistake.
Jamie?
Geez, I feel like I've made a lot of mistakes. I have a fun story about tweeting from the wrong account. I feel like I've made mistakes in blogging where I've maybe taken some of the opportunities open to me for granted, or maybe not valued myself enough and should have charged more for certain things, or too easily gave in to the allure of a paid post for something that maybe I didn't support. But I think I think you can get away with making a lot of mistakes in social media and blogging, and as long as you learn from them and you don't do them a second time, then it's all good.
I know they keep saying every election is the social media election, but there was this article about how this one truly was, because now people that are being elected into office were on Twitter when they were in high school, and it's the first time we were in that position, and lots of really crazy stuff came up. And I mean, it sucks, but that's going to continue to happen. And I think that we're going to be a bit more forgiving because we're going to recognize that now we just have access to this or information that may be negative from back in the day. I can't mistakes. I'm so perfect. But no, there's just a ton of learning, and I think just really yourself and you're being honest. Everything's but the biggest thing maybe is it's easy for this gossipy world. It's like your job, just the social media community. It's easy to be like, oh, did you hear what Zane did? Like stuff happens, especially if you're kind of in that weird Twitterati as well. So maybe I've gotten caught up in things like that. So that might be my biggest regret.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question from Trevor, and then we'll do our closing questions unless we get more from the audience. Trevor wants to know, do you feel blogging still has a strong following and influence in today's rapidly changing social media environment. Very timely, because a lot of people are talking about the long form posts on places like Facebook with the reintroduction of Facebook Notes, LinkedIn Publisher, longer form posts on Instagram, etc. So what's your take on that?
I think thinking of the blog as like a traditional blog is maybe the mistake, because I think a blog is a blog, whether you are posting it on the new Facebook Notes or Medium or whatever platform you choose to use. But I do think that sometimes I wonder the same thing about advertising. Like, is it only other people that work in advertising that are watching ads? Is it only other bloggers that are reading blogs?
Yeah.
I like to think that I've got this like weird group of strangers that subscribe to my blog and get those updates. But I think a lot of it is search engine traffic as well. So if you think about, one of my best performing posts is a blog from a few years ago it talks about, it lists like the top 10 sports bars that I like going to in Toronto. So when people are looking for a sports bar to watch the hockey game or the baseball game at, my traffic spikes. So if you think of blogs as just kind of like the new Yahoo Answers, when people need a question answered and they come to my blog to answer it, I don't think that form of blogging is dead.
I think myself that the old adage that content is king is true, and that blogging is one way of creating content. The rest of social media allows you to post photographs and audio or video as well. I have a radio show, as I mentioned earlier. So every week I get to post an hour of audio from whoever I've interviewed or spent the hour with. And I've started as well putting in little quick hits there. So I would say that not only is blogging and content important, but it's also about storytelling, and that the internet allows a huge democratization in storytelling, because it allows anybody who wants to tell just about any story they want to, and using a podcast, using your smartphone to take pictures, using and sharing other people's news stories and Twitter and Facebook posts, I think is a really great way to connect with people, tell and share stories. And there's a very important human instinct towards community connection and storytelling that the internet facilitates.
I think people are going less to like my blog now, and I'm finding that people have something to say, but they aren't keeping up a schedule or something like that. So like medium.com, people use a lot because they're like, oh, there's something going on in my life and I have something to say and I want to get it out there. So they're using this kind of interactive, cool new platform. Same thing with LinkedIn. People are using that publisher to post something and they're like, oh, I've got this audience here already. So I think blogging has changed a ton. People don't comment like they used to, and people, the like crazy huge fashion blogs have turned into these magazines now. But yeah, people are still saying things wherever it is.
Veronica wants to know if any of you use YouTube.
I actually use a slightly different service called JewTube, which is only for Jewish people. I'm just kidding. That's not true. That's not true. I wish I kept saying I want to do my own YouTube channel and create, but I don't have the chutzpah to point a camera at myself and film myself doing little videos. That I love the radio stuff and I love posting those things, but I haven't yet ventured into the brave world of YouTube. No.
Rhiannon,
Same.
Jamie?
I've posted random like karaoke videos sometimes, but I don't keep up with it.
Yeah, video's not for me.
Not for you. All of us from my class, and including me, have been making videos the last 9 weeks.
I think it's an amazing skill. That's what's keeping me back, is because now the caliber, you need to be very good you can't just post this anymore. It's not enough. I would love to. I think I'd have a ton of fun with it, but I just don't have the idea, something, or the talents.
Leave it with us. We'll come up.
Well, frankly, I've been like, I do a bunch of TV shows for the Food Network, and I have other ideas for other shows, and I keep meaning to create webisodes for YouTube where, not with a huge amount of production value, but how you open restaurants, how your food truck works, how catering events go, that there's all kinds of little dramas that happen in my life. Eden and her family have been eating at my barbecue restaurant, and we shut that down a couple of weeks ago. And I heard from her husband in no uncertain terms how unhappy he was with me for shutting the restaurant. But like all of the drama that happens in my life, I think there would be some, again, interesting storytelling to have happen and to be able to tell my own stories, because some of them are pretty.
So what's holding you back?
You know what? Part of it is time. Just the amount of time that I have to actually do things versus talk about doing things. But frankly, I really would like in the new year to. I've got some really terrific people who are helping manage different parts of the world that I live in, and to be able to focus more heavily on video production and even little things like this hot pot restaurant we went to tonight, and doing little videos around, being there and what happened there, because it was a really fun night, and we didn't know anything about anything, and we used the people around us to help guide us on what to order and how it works, and it was a fun experience. And it doesn't have to be anything more than 60 seconds or 90 seconds. And also because of the radio show that I do called Let's Eat with Zane Kaplansky, that it supports that. So it's all about the food world that I live in. I was actually just out in St. John's and in Newfoundland for 10 days and had the most incredible experience, and wish I would have done more video.
Yeah, it would have been beautiful.
Amazing place.
Veronica wants you to do a cooking show, video series.
Love to. I mean, what they call the dump and stir of like how to do stuff doesn't really exist all that much, except it does online. So if you want to learn how to make anything, plug that into YouTube, and when somebody will show you a video. And in fact, my partner often uses YouTube to find recipes and demonstrations on. And my mother was blown away when she saw how Willa does that.
Well, we could go on. I think we could go on for another hour, but we're hitting 9:00, and I don't want to take advantage of your generosity. Does anybody have any quick parting notes? I had a parting question to finish a sentence, but I would rather.
Yeah, go.
Okay, go on. Let's go. If you can go for it.
I was just going to ask Zane if you still work with Ginger.
Yeah. We're friends, but Ginger needs to pay her rent, and I wasn't getting paid at the radio station for the longest time, and I couldn't afford to pay her. And she started out on her own, and so we left on the best possible terms. She's a very dear friend, and I have nothing but. And frankly, my show has done really well, and in part, Ginger's influence as the producer for the first 4 or 5 months that we were on the air made a huge difference. But this is part of the problem as well, is that people think unmistakably that I'm loaded, and I'm just not. So I can't afford to pay people to do stuff like make videos for me and like produce my radio show. It pretty much happens because I make it up.
Sorry,
I may know some people that can help.
Just curious.
And they'll work for Smoke Meat.
That's it. Well, I mean, don't even joke. I'm finishing fundraising for my restaurant in Yorkville, and the lawyers who are working for me are literally working for Smoke Meat. And my other people in my life say to me, how can you find these incredibly talented people who bill for huge dollars, but they will do it for you for sandwiches? And I'm totally blessed to be to have the kind of support from people that I do. I I'm a lucky guy.
Jamie, do you have anything left to say?
I do, and I hope it's okay that I put this out there, but my agency, Zulu Alpha Kilo, is actually looking for a junior community manager. We actually are putting together the job description now, and it should be ready to go for tomorrow. But if anyone is kind of looking for more formal experience in community management, maybe doesn't have a ton of experience under their belt yet, shoot me a tweet on Twitter at Jamie Lee TO, and we can chat.
Great. And Jamie, you know about the LinkedIn group, so you can share it. And my class doesn't go there as much because we tend to focus on Blackboard, but by all means, you know that job postings are there. So go on over and have a look, and some great conversation. So thank you. As we come to a close tonight, I want to thank Rayanne from Tilt, Jamie from Zulu Alpha Kilo, not Kilo, and Zane from Kaplansky's. Thank you very much. We all had a great time, and thanks for everybody for coming. And the recording will be available tomorrow. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Night.